Have you ever touched something after someone passed away and felt your body hesitate, like it didn't know whether it was allowed to remember? I didn't open his phone because I missed him. Not at first. I opened it because grief is practical before it is poetic. Because funerals need numbers. Because lists always have holes. Because the dead leave before they finish explaining everything. He had been gone for 3 weeks. Cancer doesn't leave gently, even when it promises it will. People kept telling me how strong I was. I learned quickly that strong is what they call you when they don't know what else to say. At night, the house still breathed like him. The radiator clicked the way it always had. The hallway light hummed softly, and I slept on the edge of the bed, leaving his side untouched. That morning, I sat on the floor with his phone in my hands. The screen was dark. The glass was smudged in the shape of his thumb. I remember thinking something ridiculous. His phone doesn't know he's gone. I told myself I would be quick, just contacts, just names, just responsibility. We had made a funeral list together while he was still alive. He insisted on it. He said it would make things easier for you. He always said for you like it was a destination, like something he wanted to protect even when his body was failing. But the list wasn't complete. There were friends from old jobs, men he played cards with once a month, a woman he used to work with who sent soup when he first got sick, people who mattered quietly. So I turned the phone on. For half a second, my heart did something cruelly hopeful. It wondered if there would be a message, if his name would light up the screen. Grief does that. It offers you a lie and punishes you for believing it. The phone unlocked easily. I had memorized his code years ago without trying. I opened his contacts, copied numbers into my notebook, wrote names in my careful handwriting. I was calm, too calm. Then I opened the Notes app. I don't know why. I tell myself it was an accident, but part of me knows that grief is curious. The notes list was ordinary: groceries, passwords, movie titles he never got to watch. And then I saw one titled simply, Phrases. My chest tightened before my mind understood why. I opened it. The first line was something he had written to me dozens of times. I miss you more than I can say. My throat closed instantly. Below it were more lines, familiar lines, words I had read on hospital nights, words I had clutched like medicine when visiting hours ended too soon. You are my calm place. When you come, the room feels lighter. I am proud of you. Please eat something for me. I sat very still because something about the spacing felt wrong. These weren't letters, they were drafts. Below each sentence were versions, small changes, different word orders, gentler verbs, stronger ones. It was practice. My husband had been rehearsing love. English was not his first language. I knew that. I just never knew what it cost him. I scrolled slowly. There were notes in his native language beside some lines, short reminders, translations not of words, but of feeling. English softened him. His own language made him braver. I pressed my hand against my mouth when I realized what I was seeing. Every letter he had ever written me, every message that felt perfectly timed, every sentence that held me together in hospital hallways, none of them were accidental. He had worked for them, practiced them, rewritten them until they sounded like love in a language that wasn't born in his mouth. I had thought love was effortless for him, natural, easy. It wasn't. It was intentional. A tear fell onto the screen and blurred the words. I wiped it away quickly, the way you do when you still think someone might walk in and see you crying. Another note caught my eye. Hard days. I opened it. I am afraid today. I don't want to worry you. I need you, but only if you can. I am trying to be strong. I am sorry my body is like this. That last sentence broke something open inside me. I am sorry my body is like this. I remembered the night he sent it. His voice had sounded small on the phone. He didn't want me to see him weak. I thought the message had come straight from his heart in that moment. It had. But it had also come from preparation. He had prepared not to hurt me, even while he was dying. I sat there with his phone, my tea cold beside me, and the house listening quietly. I realized something that scared me. I had been loved more carefully than I ever knew. Another note, birthday words. I smiled through tears when I opened it. Multiple openings, crossed out emotionally, edited with small comments to himself. Keep it simple. She likes simple. I laughed softly, because he was right. And then I copied the notes to my own phone, not to steal, but because grief makes you afraid that memory is temporary. Each message sent to myself felt like he was handing something back to me. Then I saw a note at the bottom of the list. 2 initials only. No explanation. My breath caught. I searched his contacts. Nothing. I searched his messages. Nothing. I searched his email. Still nothing. I opened the note. At the top was a date, months before he died. Under it, 1 sentence. Don't forget him. Below that, a list of memories. And the first line said, he taught me English when I first arrived. The room seemed to tilt slightly, because suddenly English was not just the language of our love. It was the story of how he survived before me. I realized then this phone wasn't just holding his words to me. It was holding parts of him I had never met. I sat there in the quiet, knowing that I had crossed into something deeper than grief, something unfinished, something he had carried alone. And I knew if I kept reading, my understanding of him would change forever. Would you want to know if the person you loved most still had secrets that mattered? If so, are you ready to hear what I found next? I didn't close the note right away. I just stared at the screen, at those initials, at the sentence that asked me not to forget someone I had never met. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had leaned in to listen. Grief is strange that way. It opens doors you didn't know existed, and then it dares you to walk through them. I sat back against the headboard and pulled the blanket around my shoulders, not because I was cold, but because my body needed something solid. The phone felt heavier now, not with weight, with meaning. I scrolled again, slowly, carefully. The list under the initials wasn't long, but every line felt deliberate. Short memories, fragments, moments preserved because he was afraid time would erase them. He corrected my pronunciation without laughing. He bought me coffee when I couldn't afford lunch. He said, English sounds kinder when spoken slowly. My chest tightened. I had spent years loving this man, sharing a bed, sharing a life, sharing hospital rooms and waiting rooms and quiet nights. And still, there were parts of him that existed before me, parts he had never fully explained. Not because he didn't trust me, but because some histories don't ask to be explained, they just ask to be remembered. I read the list again, then again. One line stopped me completely. He told me to practice my words before I speak them. My breath caught. Practice my words. That was what he had been doing all along, practicing language, practicing love, practicing care, so he wouldn't hurt anyone with clumsiness, so he wouldn't say the wrong thing at the wrong time, so he wouldn't fail the people he cared about. I closed the note gently, like it could feel my touch. For a moment, I wanted to stop, to put the phone down, to pretend that discovering this much was enough. But grief doesn't respect boundaries. It whispers, "You're already here." So I kept going. I returned to the phrases note, scrolled deeper this time. There were sections I hadn't noticed before, titles he had written for himself: comfort and courage, when she is tired, when I am afraid. My hands began to shake again because I recognized those moments, the nights I came home exhausted from pretending everything was fine, the mornings I tried to be strong for him and failed, the hospital afternoons when fear sat between us like a third body in the bed. He had prepared for all of them. I opened When She Is Tired. You don't have to do everything. I see how hard you try. Please rest, my love. I had read those words so many times, I thought they were instinct. They weren't. They were chosen carefully, practiced patiently, chosen because he wanted me to feel seen. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. Memories began to rise on their own. Him sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, rewriting a sentence 3 times before pressing send. Him asking me quietly, "Does this sound right?" Me laughing gently, telling him everything he said sounded right because it was his. I hadn't known then. I hadn't known how much effort lived behind his gentleness. There was another note, words I want her to keep. My heart stumbled. I opened it slowly. The list was short. I love you without fear. You made my life bigger. You are my home. And then one line at the bottom, written alone, no variations, no edits. If I cannot say goodbye, these words must do it. I pressed my hand flat against my chest. He had known. Some part of him had known that time would not be generous, that goodbye might not arrive cleanly, so he prepared words to stand in his place, words that could survive without him. I felt something crack open inside me then, not loud, not dramatic, just deep, like ice breaking under slow water. I had been so focused on the moment he died, on the machines going quiet, on the way the room emptied afterward, I hadn't noticed how long he had been preparing to leave me gently. I sat there for a long time. The house darkened around me, evening sliding into night without ceremony. I didn't turn on a lamp. I wanted the room to stay honest. I thought about the letters we used to write, how we started because hospital visits were short, how nurses always knocked too soon, how he hated seeing disappointment flicker across my face when time ran out. The letters became our way to stretch time, to keep talking after goodbye. I remembered one night clearly. He was in the hospital. The window behind him reflected fluorescent light, his hair thinner than he wanted to admit. He handed me a folded piece of paper, smiled, and said, "Later." When I read it at home, I cried into my pillow. The letter said, "When you leave, the room remembers you." I had thought it was spontaneous poetry. Now I knew better. He had practiced that sentence somewhere, rewritten it until it fit just right, not because it wasn't true at first, but because he wanted it to land gently in my heart. That was who he was, someone who didn't just feel deeply, but prepared deeply. I wondered how many moments of our life together had been rehearsed like that, not in a dishonest way, but in a devoted one. The thought made me ache. I scrolled further down the notes list. There were unfinished drafts, half sentences, thoughts that never became messages. I wish I could protect you from this. I am scared of leaving you alone. I hope you forgive me for going first. I closed my eyes again. That last one echoed painfully. Forgive me for going first. As if death were a choice he had made carelessly, as if he owed me an apology for his body giving up. Tears slid quietly down my face. I didn't wipe them away this time. I let them fall. I realized something then. I had been replaying our last days again and again, looking for mistakes, for moments I should have said more, done more, held his hand longer. But here he was, telling me he had already tried to soften the ending, that he had already prepared words to hold me when he couldn't anymore. My grief shifted slightly, not lighter, just different, less sharp. I finally put the phone down and lay back on the bed. The ceiling looked unfamiliar without his breathing beside me. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. I thought about language, how love sounds different depending on the mouth that speaks it, how he had crossed oceans and alphabets to reach me, how he had learned not just English, but my English, the rhythm I understood, the softness I needed. I wondered how many nights he lay awake practicing sentences I would one day read after he was gone. That thought stayed with me as sleep finally came. But sleep was not kind that night. Dreams arrived fragmented, voices without faces, letters dissolving in my hands. I woke before dawn with my heart racing. The phone was still on the bed beside me, dark, silent. For a moment I felt angry that he had done this alone, angry that he had carried so much quietly, angry that I hadn't known how hard he was working just to love me well. Then the anger softened, because love is not diminished by effort, it is defined by it. I picked up the phone again, not to search for numbers this time, but to understand the man I had married more fully, because grief is not just missing someone, it is relearning them without their help. And I knew, if I continued reading, I would find more than phrases. I would find choices, fears, silences, things he never said out loud because he was protecting me. And the question pressed itself into my chest. Did I want to know everything now, or did I want to keep some parts of him untouched? I stared at the screen as the sun began to rise outside the window, knowing that whatever I chose next, there was no way to unread love once you had seen how carefully it was made. Would you keep going if you knew the truth might change the way you remembered the person you loved most? If you want to hear what else I found, morning light came in quietly. It didn't feel like a new day. It felt like the same day, stretched thinner. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone beside my mug. The tea was warm this time, but I barely tasted it. Outside, people were going to work. Cars moved like life was normal. Birds insisted on singing, and I hated them a little for it. The phone was still the center of the table, like a small black altar, like a doorway I kept reopening with shaking hands. I told myself again that I still had a job to do. Find the missing contacts, include the people he loved, make sure the funeral didn't forget anyone who mattered. But I already knew the truth. I was not just looking for numbers anymore. I was looking for him. I opened the note with the initials again, the one that said, "Don't forget him." The list of memories stared back at me. Simple lines, short, almost shy, written like someone afraid of making a mess. I read them slowly, and as I did, a picture started forming. A man from his past, a figure standing quietly behind the version of my husband that I knew. He taught me English when I first arrived. He corrected my pronunciation without laughing. He bought me coffee when I couldn't afford lunch. Then that line again, the one that had chilled me the night before. He came to the hospital once, and I didn't tell you. I stared at it until my eyes stung. Why would he write that? Why would he hide it? Why would he keep it as a private fragment? I tried to be fair. Grief makes you suspicious. It makes you look for betrayal in shadows. But the sentence didn't feel romantic. It didn't feel like a secret lover. It felt like something else, a different kind of intimacy, a past bond, a loyalty, or a guilt. I scrolled down again. There were more lines under it I hadn't noticed before, because the first time my fear had blurred everything else. She would not understand then. I didn't want to make her jealous. It was not about love. It was about gratitude. Gratitude. My breath came out in a slow, shaky exhale. Gratitude can look like secrecy when grief is watching. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the table, my fingers pressed into my forehead. I tried to remember every time he had mentioned someone from his early years here. He had told me stories, sometimes, about arriving with 2 suitcases, about the cold that made his bones ache, about the way he practiced English in the mirror, about being embarrassed when people laughed at his accent. I had listened, but I had never asked deeply, not because I didn't care, but because he always brushed past those parts quickly, like they belonged to someone else. I opened the contacts again, typed his initials into the search bar. Nothing. I opened his email, searched again, still nothing. My stomach tightened. How do you find someone your husband loved when the only clue is 2 letters and a sentence asking you not to forget him? I tried another way. I opened his message history, not by searching initials, but by searching words: coffee, English, teacher, arrived. Nothing at first, then one hit appeared. A conversation from years ago, so old it felt like another lifetime. The contact name wasn't saved, just a number, and the messages were short. Your language is improving. Keep going. I'm proud of you. My throat tightened. The words, "I'm proud of you," hit me like a wave, because that was a phrase my husband used for me. Now I was seeing him receiving it. I scrolled further. The last message from the number was dated 3 months before he died. "How are you? I heard you are sick. Do you need anything?" And my husband's reply, "Thank you. I'm okay. My wife takes care of me. I will always be grateful to you." I felt something shift in my chest. Always be grateful to you. So this was him, the man behind the initials, the one I didn't know. I stared at the number. My thumb hovered over the screen. Should I call? Should I text? Should I pull a stranger into my grief? What would I even say? "Hello? You don't know me, but my husband is dead." My fingers went cold just thinking about it. I set the phone down again, stood up, walked to the sink, ran water over my hands like I could wash the heaviness off. Then I heard his voice in my memory, not his dying voice, his normal voice, the voice that used to tease me when I overthought things. He would say, "Be brave, my love." So I went back to the table, sat down, and I sent a message to the number. It took me 10 minutes to write a simple sentence. "Hello, my name is... I'm wife. He passed away last year. I found your number and I believe he wanted me to contact you." I stared at it, then I deleted it. Too direct, too raw, too much grief in one breath. I tried again. "Hello, I hope you're well. This is... I'm... wife. I'm preparing a memorial and I wanted to reach someone important to him." My hands were shaking. I pressed send before I could change my mind again. The message flew away instantly, and I felt like I had just stepped off a cliff. For the next hour, I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room. I checked the phone too many times. I told myself I didn't care if he replied, but I cared, because the initials note had asked me not to forget him, and now I needed to know why. The reply came when I was standing at the window. "Hello. Yes, I know him. I am sorry. I didn't know he passed." I cried reading this. My knees went weak. I sat down on the floor right there, back against the wall, phone in my hand, breath shallow. Then another message arrived. "I am the one who helped him with English when he first arrived. He was very proud when he met you. He always spoke of you with respect." I covered my mouth with my free hand. It was the word respect that broke me, because that was exactly what my husband gave me, respect that felt like warmth. I typed back slowly, "Thank you for replying. I found notes on his phone. He practiced phrases for letters to me. I didn't know he worked that hard." The reply came after a pause. "He practiced everything, not only English. He practiced courage. He practiced being gentle. He was afraid of being misunderstood." My eyes filled again. Practiced courage. That phrase stayed in my head like music because it explained so much about him. How he could be scared and still show up. How he could be in pain and still ask if I had eaten. How he could be dying and still try to comfort me. I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "He wrote that you came to the hospital once, and he didn't tell me. Can you tell me why?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, and I realized that grief does not belong only to widows. It belongs to anyone who loved the dead, even quietly, even from the past. Finally, the message arrived. "He asked me to come when he first got diagnosed, before he told anyone. He was scared. He wanted to speak to someone who knew him before the sickness. I came. We talked in our language. He cried. He asked me how to be brave. Then he told me he would tell you soon, but later he said he didn't want to worry you too early." I stared at those words until my vision blurred. So that was it. Not betrayal, not romance, not anything ugly, just fear, just a man trying to hold himself together before he handed the truth to me. I felt something soften inside me because for a moment I could see him clearly. A man sitting on a hospital bed, holding a terrifying diagnosis in his hands and reaching backward into his past for strength before he turned to face the future with me. I typed slowly, "Thank you for telling me. I think I understand." The reply came, "He loved you very much. He wanted to speak English beautifully for you. He said you deserved the best words." The best words. I stared down at my husband's phone, at the Notes app, at the practiced phrases, and suddenly I understood something that changed the way I carried my grief. His love for me was not only a feeling, it was a craft. He built it deliberately, word by word, choice by choice, even when his body was falling apart. That night I opened the notes again, not with fear this time, with tenderness. I began to read his practice like a diary of devotion. I read the places where he corrected himself, where he softened a sentence, where he tried again. And as I read, I realized there was another kind of pain hidden here too, because if he practiced words for me, there might also be words he never sent, words he wrote and deleted, words too heavy to place on my shoulders. I went back to the notes list, scrolled lower, and I saw a folder title that made my breath stop. Things I Can't Tell Her. My finger hovered over it. The kitchen light above me buzzed softly. The house held its breath again. I knew if I opened it, I might find love, or I might find regret, or I might find something that would change the way I remembered our last year forever. And I wasn't sure if I was ready. But grief doesn't ask if you're ready. It only asks, will you look? Do you want me to open it with you? I sat there for a long time with my finger hovering over the screen, over that folder title that felt heavier than all the others combined. Things I Can't Tell Her. The house was completely still, not the peaceful kind of stillness, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath with you. I told myself I didn't have to open it, that love doesn't require complete knowledge, that some things are allowed to remain private. But grief is not polite. Grief is curious. Grief is stubborn. Grief wants the whole truth, even when it hurts. I thought about all the nights he lay awake in hospital beds, the ceiling lights too bright, the beeping machines too loud. I thought about him opening his notes app in the dark, typing quietly, deleting, rewriting, and I realized something important. If he had taken the time to name this folder, then it mattered to him that it existed. So I opened it. The note loaded instantly, but my mind did not. At the top was a date, early, very early in his illness, before the treatments, before the weight loss, before we learned new medical words we never wanted to know. The first line read, "I don't know how to tell her I am scared." My chest tightened. He had told me he was scared. I remembered that clearly, or at least I remembered the version of fear he allowed me to see. Below that line were fragments, not full sentences, thoughts caught halfway through breathing. I need to be strong for her. If I fall apart, she will fall apart. I don't want her to see me weak. I swallowed hard, because I remembered those days, how he smiled too much, how he asked me about my day even when he was exhausted, how he made jokes in waiting rooms. I had thought he was brave by nature. Now I saw the effort behind it. The next lines were harder to read. I am afraid she will remember me sick. I want her memories to be warm. I don't want to become a burden. My eyes burned. Burden. That word lives quietly in so many sick people, even when no one puts it there. I scrolled slowly. There were notes written after treatments. Dates matched to days I remembered as especially hard. Today I wanted to cry, but she smiled. I held it in. I will cry later alone. I pressed my lips together tightly. I remembered coming home those nights, thinking he was coping better than me. The truth was crueler and kinder at the same time. He was coping for me. Further down the note, the tone shifted slightly. The sentences became softer. If I die, I hope she knows I tried. I hope my love was enough, even when my body was not. I felt the air leave my lungs in a quiet rush. My hands were trembling now, not violently, just enough to notice. I paused there, let myself breathe, let the tears come without wiping them away. Then I kept reading. Near the bottom was a section titled simply, After. My heart started racing. The lines under it were sparse, deliberate. Tell her she is not responsible for my death. Tell her she did not fail me. Tell her to live without apologizing. I covered my mouth with my hand, because he was speaking directly to the version of me that now existed, the widow, the woman who replayed conversations at night, the woman who wondered if she should have done more. He had anticipated my guilt, and he had tried to take it away before it could root itself too deeply. The final line in the folder was dated only days before he died. It read, I wish I could say all of this out loud, but words are heavy at the end. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Words are heavy at the end. I thought about his breathing those last days, how each sentence cost him something, how he would squeeze my hand instead of speaking, how I would lean close and tell him he didn't need to talk. I realized then that silence had not meant absence, it had meant trust. Trust that I would eventually find these words. Trust that they would arrive when I was strong enough to read them. I closed the note gently as if I were closing his eyes again. The phone felt warm in my hands, warmer than before. I set it down on the bed and lay beside it, staring at the ceiling again. The house breathed with me. I felt emptied and full at the same time. Grief is strange like that. It can hollow you out and then pour meaning back in. That night I dreamed of him differently. Not sick, not fragile. He was sitting at a small desk, writing slowly, stopping to think, smiling when he found the right word. When I woke, my pillow was damp, but my chest felt calmer than it had in weeks. In the days that followed, I returned to the notes often, not obsessively, reverently. I read one phrase at a time, let it settle, let it remind me of the man I loved. Not just the man who died, but the man who worked to love me well. I began to understand something important. Love is not always loud. It is not always spontaneous. Sometimes love looks like someone practicing sentences alone in the dark, so the person they love never feels unsure. Sometimes love is preparation, and that knowledge changed how I carried my grief. I no longer felt like I had been abandoned by death. I felt accompanied, even now. But there was still something unresolved, because in the folder of things he couldn't tell me, there were fears he never shared. And I wondered, were there hopes he never spoke either? Things he wanted for me after him? Dreams he didn't dare to say out loud? The thought stayed with me as I closed his phone and placed it carefully in the drawer. I knew I wasn't finished yet. There was one more part of him still waiting to be understood. And if I was brave enough to keep looking, I might find not just his pain, but his final wish. Would you want to hear what he hoped for me after he was gone? If so, I didn't open his phone again for a few days, not because I was finished, but because some truths need air before they can be touched again. Grief is not a straight line. It's a tide. It comes in, it pulls back. It leaves things behind that you don't recognize at first. Those days I moved slowly through the house, like every object had learned his shape, like the walls still expected his voice to return. I cooked out of habit, burned the rice, forgot to eat it anyway. At night, I lay on my side of the bed and listened to the quiet, not the peaceful kind, the waiting kind. Eventually, the phone called to me again, not loudly, just persistently. I opened the drawer one evening after sunset, the sky outside turning that soft blue that feels like a held breath. I sat on the bed and turned the phone on again. This time, I wasn't afraid. I was steady. Sad, but steady. I opened the Notes app and scrolled past the folders I now knew too well. Then I saw one I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't titled with emotion. It simply said, "For her." My chest tightened immediately. Not panic, recognition. I opened it. Inside were short entries, dates next to some, others undated, like thoughts that arrived without warning. The first line read, "I hope she keeps laughing loudly." I smiled despite myself. He always loved that about me, even when I embarrassed him in public, even when people turned to look. The next line, "I hope she travels again." I swallowed. Travel had been our language before illness. Cities, train stations, coffee shops with menus neither of us fully understood. Then, "I hope she does not shrink her life to match my absence." That line hurt in a precise way. Shrink. I had been shrinking already, without noticing. There were more lines. "I hope she forgives herself quickly." "I hope she remembers I chose her joy over my fear." "I hope she believes she did enough." I pressed my thumb against the edge of the phone, grounding myself, because this was no longer about the past. This was about the future he would never see. Further down, "I hope she loves again without guilt." That sentence made my breath hitch. Love again. The idea felt impossible and disloyal at the same time. I had not let myself think that far, had not allowed that door to even exist in my mind. And yet, here he was, opening it for me. "I hope she does not compare new love to old love. Love is not a replacement. It is a continuation of living." Tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. He had thought about this while dying. He had imagined me alive without him, and instead of clinging, instead of asking me to stay frozen in his memory, he had released me. I had never known how brave that was. I kept reading. "I hope she keeps my words, but not my suffering. I hope she remembers me when she feels strong, not only when she feels sad." I laughed softly through tears at that one, because of course he would say that. He hated being remembered as fragile. Even in his worst days, he wanted to be more than his illness. Near the bottom of the note was a section written later, the dates closer together, the handwriting in my mind shakier. "I am afraid she will stop trusting happiness. I want her to know joy is not disrespect." That sentence settled into me slowly. Joy is not disrespect. I had been treating every moment of lightness like betrayal, like laughing meant I was leaving him behind. But he had already given permission. No, more than permission. He had asked for it. The final line in the note was short, unpolished, like he hadn't had the strength to rewrite it. "If she reads this, then I am gone, but my love is not." I closed my eyes and held the phone to my chest. That was when the tears came fully. Not sharp, not desperate, just deep. The kind of crying that empties something old and makes space for something new. I stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, the phone slipped from my hands onto the bed. I lay back and stared at the ceiling again, but this time the ceiling didn't feel like it was closing in. It felt open. I thought about all the ways I had been preparing to disappear with him, quietly, without noticing. And I realized he had been preparing me not to. Love for him had never been possession. It had always been protection, even from himself. The next morning, I did something different. I opened the curtains fully, let sunlight flood the room. I made coffee and drank it while standing at the window. I didn't feel better, but I felt allowed to feel better someday. That mattered more than I expected. Later that day, I took the phone with me to the park, sat on a bench, and reread some of his practiced phrases. I am proud of you. You are my calm place. I realized something quietly important. Those words weren't only meant for the past. They were instructions. He had been teaching me how to speak to myself after he was gone, how to be gentle, how to be patient, how to keep choosing life. As the sun lowered, I put the phone away again. I wasn't done with it, but I no longer felt trapped inside it. There was one more thing I hadn't considered yet. What to do with these words now? Keep them private or let them breathe beyond me? Because love that careful, love that practiced, it doesn't want to stay silent forever. That thought stayed with me as I walked home, and I knew the next step would change how this story lived in the world, not just in me. Would you want to know what I decided to do with his words? If so, for a long time I kept his words folded inside me, not literally, but emotionally, like pressed flowers in an old book, too fragile to touch, too precious to throw away. I went back to work, answered emails, nodded in meetings, and learned how to smile without explaining why it felt wrong. People assume grief fades quickly if you function well enough. They confuse movement with healing. Every evening I came home and sat with the quiet again, sometimes with his phone, sometimes without it, but his words stayed with me either way. I hope she does not shrink her life. Joy is not disrespect. They echoed when I hesitated to make plans, when I turned down invitations because it felt safer to stay invisible. One night I took the phone out again, not urgently this time, not with shaking hands. I opened the Notes app slowly, like greeting someone you know well now. I read his practiced phrases out loud for the first time. My voice sounded strange at first, like it didn't belong to the words. But then something shifted. The sentences settled into the room. They didn't feel like ghosts. They felt warmth. You are my calm place. I said it softly, then louder. I realized something then. He had practiced these words so carefully because he wanted them to be spoken, not just read. And suddenly, keeping them locked inside my phone felt wrong, not selfish, just incomplete. The next morning, I copied some of his phrases into a notebook. Not all of them, just a few, the ones that felt like anchors. I am proud of you. You did enough. My love is still here. I wrote them in my own handwriting, slowly, deliberately. It felt like a conversation across time. That afternoon, a friend came over, someone who had known him well. She noticed the notebook on the table, asked gently what it was. I hesitated, then told her the truth about the phone, the notes, the practiced words. Her eyes filled with tears before she spoke. He always chose his words carefully. That sounds like him. Hearing someone else confirm it mattered more than I expected. That night, after she left, I sat with a question I couldn't ignore anymore. What do you do with love like this? Love that was built with intention, love that survived language barriers, love that outlived the body that carried it. I thought about all the nights he practiced alone, about the effort hidden behind gentle sentences, and I realized something quietly radical. These words were not only for me. They were proof that love can be learned, practiced, chosen. They were proof that tenderness is not accidental. So I did something that scared me. I shared one sentence online, just one, no explanation, no backstory, only the words he had written. You are my calm place. I stared at the screen for a long time before posting. Then I pressed send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then messages began to arrive. Quiet ones, careful ones. People saying, I needed this tonight. This sounds like someone I loved. I didn't know words could feel like this. I sat there stunned. His words were doing what he had always wanted them to do, comforting people, even now. Over the next weeks, I shared more, slowly, thoughtfully, always crediting him silently in my heart. Each time, the response was the same. People recognized something true in his language, something gentle and strong at the same time. I realized then that love doesn't disappear when the person does. It changes form. It moves outward. I still missed him every day. That didn't stop. But my grief no longer felt sealed shut. It had windows now. One evening, as I closed the notebook, I noticed something else. I had started writing my own sentences beside his. Not answers, reflections. I am learning to rest. I am still here. I smiled softly at that one because I finally understood something he had known all along. Love prepares you to live, even after it ends. The phone stayed in the drawer more often now, not because I was done with it, but because I had absorbed what it was trying to give me. There was still more to this journey. Not discovery this time, but transformation. Because the question was no longer what he left behind. The question was who I was becoming with it. Would I let his love remain a memory, or would I let it shape the rest of my life? That choice waited quietly in front of me, and I knew the next step would be the hardest one yet. Would you walk with me into that next chapter? If so, something subtle changed after I began sharing his words. Not loudly, not all at once. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't closure. It was permission. Permission to breathe without checking if grief approved first. Permission to exist as more than someone's absence. I started noticing my own voice again, not the one I used for polite conversations, but the one that spoke when I was alone. It sounded different now, softer in some places, stronger in others. I still woke up some mornings with the instinct to reach for him. My hand still moved across the bed before my mind caught up, but the moment didn't collapse me anymore. It just reminded me. Love had lived here, deeply, and that mattered. One afternoon, I found myself rereading the note where he wrote, "Love is not a replacement, it is a continuation of living." I had skimmed over that line before. It had felt too far away, too theoretical. Now it felt closer, like a challenge he had left me. Continuation doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean moving on like nothing happened. It means allowing life to keep unfolding without apology. I tested that idea slowly. I said yes to coffee with a friend when I wanted to say no. I went to a small concert alone. I laughed in public without immediately feeling guilty. Each time there was a flicker of fear. Is this allowed? and each time his words answered before I could finish the thought. Joy is not disrespect. I began to see how carefully he had prepared me, not just with practiced phrases, but with values. He had modeled love as something that expands, not something that traps. One evening, I sat at my desk with a blank page in front of me. For the first time since he died, I wanted to write something that wasn't about survival, not about logistics, not about grief management, just about being alive. I wrote slowly, not to an audience, not to him, to myself. I wrote sentences the way he used to practice them, gently, then again, then better. I am allowed to change. I am still loved. I can carry him without disappearing. I stopped and laughed quietly because I sounded like him now. That realization startled me. Love had shaped my language, not just how I spoke to others, but how I spoke inwardly. I wondered if this was what people meant when they said someone lives on, not as a memory frozen in time, but as a pattern that continues to repeat itself through you, a way of choosing words, a way of noticing care, a way of pausing before speaking. I noticed it when I comforted someone else, when I waited instead of interrupting, when I chose kindness even when I was tired. I had inherited his patience. And then, one day, something happened that surprised me completely. I caught myself thinking about the future, not vaguely, not as an abstract concept, but specifically. I imagined a version of myself a few years from now, still carrying him, but no longer anchored to pain. The image didn't feel disloyal, it felt honest. That night, I opened his phone one more time, not to search, not to discover, just to thank him silently. I scrolled through the notes without urgency, without fear. They felt familiar now. I noticed something new this time. Toward the end of many notes, he had written small reminders to himself. Breathe, slow, say it with care. I smiled softly. Those weren't just writing notes, they were life instructions. I closed the app and locked the phone. For the first time, it didn't feel like closing a door. It felt like putting something sacred back where it belonged. In the weeks that followed, I stopped rereading his words every day, not because they lost meaning, but because they had done their work. They had become part of me. Grief shifted again. It was still there, but it no longer demanded all my attention. It sat beside me instead of on top of me. One morning, while walking past a cafe we used to love, I paused. I expected pain. Instead, I felt gratitude. Clean, simple. I whispered quietly, "Thank you." Not to the place, not to the memory, to him. I understood then that love doesn't ask to be preserved perfectly. It asks to be lived forward imperfectly. And I was finally doing that. There was only one thing left that I hadn't faced yet, the question of who I was now, without the role of caretaker, without the identity of wife to a dying man. That answer was still forming, and it waited just ahead. There is a strange moment in grief. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't arrive with drama, it comes quietly, like realizing you've been holding your breath for years, and suddenly you're not. That was where I found myself. Not broken, not healed, just standing in the space between. For so long, my days had been shaped around care, appointments, medication schedules, encouraging words practiced carefully. I had been a wife, a witness, a protector of calm, then a widow. a keeper of memories, a carrier of carefully chosen words. But one morning, while making coffee, I noticed something unsettling. I wasn't thinking about him first. The thought didn't hurt, it startled me. I stood there holding the mug, heart beating faster than it should have. Who am I now? Not because I didn't love him anymore, but because love had stopped defining every movement. That question followed me through the day, at the grocery store, at the park, at night when I turned the light off without checking if anyone else was ready to sleep. I realized how long I had existed in reaction, reacting to illness, reacting to fear, reacting to time running out. Even after his death, I had been reacting to grief. But now there was space, and space demands something from you: choice. I sat down that evening with a notebook again. Not his words this time, mine. The page stayed blank for a long time. Then I wrote one sentence: I am allowed to exist without saving anyone. I stared at it. The sentence felt rebellious, almost dangerous. Saving had become my language of love, my proof of worth. If I wasn't needed, was I still valuable? The thought made my stomach tighten. I realized then that loving him through cancer had shaped me in ways I hadn't examined yet. I had learned to stay calm in chaos, to choose softness under pressure, to hold space without demanding resolution. Those weren't just survival skills, they were parts of me now, and they didn't need illness to justify their existence. Over the next weeks, I practiced something new. Not productivity, not strength, presence. I went for walks without destinations, sat in cafes without checking the time, let silence stretch without filling it. Sometimes grief visited, sometimes it didn't. I stopped judging either outcome. One afternoon, someone asked me how I was doing, not politely, not out of obligation, genuinely. And for the first time, I didn't answer with, I'm okay, out of habit. I said, I'm learning who I am again. The words surprised both of us. That night, I thought about him differently, not as the center of my identity, but as someone who had walked beside me while I became myself. That distinction mattered. Love doesn't replace identity, it reveals it. I understood something quietly profound then. He hadn't prepared words for me so I would remain his forever. He had prepared them so I would survive being myself without him. The realization softened something deep in my chest. I opened his phone once more, not to read, not to search, just to look at it. It no longer felt like an extension of his body. It felt like a completed conversation. I placed it back in the drawer and closed it gently. Some doors don't need to stay open to remain meaningful. They just need to have been walked through honestly. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something unfamiliar. Not loneliness, not peace, possibility. It didn't scare me anymore because I finally understood what he had been teaching me all along. Love doesn't ask you to disappear inside it. It asks you to become fully yourself, even after it ends. And there was still one final truth waiting ahead, the quietest one, the one about how love stays, not in words, not in phones, but in how you choose to live when no one is watching. There is a moment in grief that no one warns you about. Not the moment of loss, not the moment of realization, but the moment when the noise finally fades, when the casseroles stop arriving, when people stop asking how you are, when the world assumes you've adjusted. That was when I noticed how love stayed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the smallest places. I noticed it in how I folded laundry now, careful, unrushed. I noticed it in how I spoke to strangers, slower, kinder. I noticed it when I paused before answering questions, the way he used to pause to choose the right words. Love had stayed inside my habits. It had changed my timing. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair before bed. I caught my own reflection and hesitated, not because I looked tired, but because I looked present. I hadn't realized how long I had been disappearing quietly, shrinking my expressions, lowering my needs. Illness had taught me how to wait, how to anticipate pain, how to make space for fear. But love had taught me something else, how to remain gentle without vanishing. I sat on the bed and thought about the woman I had been before him. She had been louder, more impatient, certain that love was something that happened quickly or not at all. Then I thought about the woman I was during his illness, focused, alert, quietly terrified. Now there was a third version of me forming, not before, not during, after. She was slower, more deliberate, less afraid of silence. And she existed because of him, not in spite of losing him. One night, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old letter, one of the first ones he ever wrote me. The paper had softened with time, the ink slightly faded. The English wasn't perfect, but the care was unmistakable. I am not good with words yet, but I am learning for you. I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. He had been learning long before I understood why. Learning language, learning patience, learning how to love gently in a world that often misunderstands gentleness. I realized then that love didn't stay in his words alone. It stayed in how he had changed me, in how I listened more than I spoke, in how I didn't rush people to conclusions, in how I allowed pauses to exist without filling them. Love had rewired my instincts, and that was its quiet victory. One afternoon, I was sitting in a cafe when a couple at the next table began arguing softly. Their voices weren't loud, but the tension was sharp. I felt my body tense automatically. Then I did something unexpected. I breathed, slowly, and I realized I didn't need to intervene, didn't need to absorb their discomfort. I could remain myself without fixing anything. That was new. That was love's residue, too. He had taught me boundaries without ever using the word. Later that day, I wrote another sentence in my notebook. I can care without carrying. It felt important because for so long, love had meant carrying everything, all the weight, all the fear. Now it meant something different. It meant trust. Trust that people can hold their own lives. Trust that love doesn't collapse when you step back. I thought about the man who had helped him with English, the quiet gratitude, the hospital visit I hadn't known about. I understood now why that mattered to him. He had needed a witness who remembered him before illness defined him, just as I needed to remember myself before grief tried to define me. That symmetry settled inside me gently. Love stays, but it doesn't freeze time. It moves forward with you. It becomes the way you choose words, the way you choose patience, the way you choose not to harden. I stopped being afraid of the future then, not because it was clear, but because I trusted myself to meet it honestly. The final realization came quietly one morning. I was walking down the street, sunlight filtering through trees, and I smiled without thinking, not because of a memory, not because of relief, just because I felt alive. I stopped walking and let that sink in. Alive, not surviving, not honoring, living. And in that moment, I felt him with me, not as a presence, not as a ghost, but as a foundation, something solid beneath my feet. Love had stayed, not to hold me back, but to hold me up. There was only one thing left now, not another discovery, not another note, just the final understanding of what this journey had been preparing me for. The quiet ending, the one that doesn't need words. The ending of this story didn't arrive like an ending. It arrived like a morning, unannounced, unremarkable, certain. One day I realized I no longer needed to open his phone, not because I had forgotten it, not because it had lost meaning, but because everything it had given me was already living inside me. Grief doesn't disappear, it changes temperature. It goes from burning to warm, from something you must survive to something you can carry. I still think of him every day, but not always with sadness. Sometimes it's with a smile when I choose my words carefully. Sometimes it's with gratitude when I pause instead of reacting. Sometimes it's with quiet pride when I notice how gently I now treat myself. That gentleness came from him, not because he asked for it, but because he practiced it over and over in a language that wasn't his, in a body that was failing him, in a future he knew he wouldn't reach. I used to think love was something you felt. Now I know love is something you do, something you rehearse when no one is watching, something you choose even when it costs you effort. I placed his phone in a box one afternoon, along with letters, photos, small objects that once felt too painful to touch. I didn't seal the box tightly, I didn't hide it away, I just let it exist, like love does when it's no longer afraid of being lost. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice in my head, not saying anything important, not delivering wisdom, just reminding me to slow down, to breathe, to choose care over noise. I have learned something essential through all of this. Love does not ask you to remain broken to prove it mattered. It asks you to live well, to speak gently, to forgive yourself quickly, to let joy return without apology. He didn't leave me with instructions to grieve forever. He left me with instructions to live. And so I do. I wake up, I drink my coffee, I choose words carefully, I practice kindness, even when it would be easier not to, because somewhere along the way, his love became my language, not written in notes anymore, not saved on a phone, but spoken in the way I exist in the world. If you're listening to this and you've lost someone, or you're afraid of losing someone, I want you to know something gently. Love does not end when a voice goes quiet. It continues in habits, in patience, in the way you choose not to harden. The truest proof of love is not how much it hurts when it's gone, but how much it teaches you how to live after. Tonight, as you rest, as the world grows quiet around you, let this thought stay with you. You were loved more carefully than you may ever fully realize. and that love is still working, even now.